call to order the Senate Gun Violence Prevention Working Group meeting. I will welcome everyone who's here in the building, and of course whoever's watching us online or in the media. This is our second meeting. We met on Monday to go through a list of proposals, hear some testimony from the public, those affected by recent gun violence, and advocates for particular solutions. Prior to this week, we did invite anyone who wanted to suggest or propose legislation or funding to come forward and to do so, particularly soliciting that from our colleagues in the Senate. Whatever was submitted was on the agenda for Monday. We did have one item from Senator Gruenhagen. As of this morning, I'm not aware that we have received any particular proposals from our GOP colleagues. I do want to say that they are still invited, and we would welcome the discussion. And if there's something in the course of our conversation here this morning that you would like us to consider, please let us know so that we can have a conversation about it and consider it as a part of this working group's recommendations. Senator Drahan.
Thank you, Chair Latz. Would that include topics that aren't related to gun violence, per se, mental health, I guess, and school safety? I guess they're related, but you know, that's been what I have tried to do the 9 years I've been here, is work on solutions for mental health and for school safety. You know, we could, if we have time, I know we're starting a little late, but to have just a little discussion on those topics. I did not bring forward drafts with 36 hours of notice. I just didn't have time to have staff draft in a form that I thought was ready for prime time. And for special session, I think I have 6 bills already being drafted to address what I think should be more labeled school safety is my top priority. And if we could have some time to talk about that, that would be great. You're the chair, it's your agenda, but I just wanted to put that out there. If people want to have those type of discussions, there's 3 of us that went to a tour in Lakeville to tour one of their schools there and how they are doing their best to protect the children in that worst case scenario. And I think having that discussion is very important. If we have time, I would love to see that. On the mental health side, you know, what we did a couple years ago, very bipartisan group worked on mental health and tried to get that to the forefront. I asked for a committee, separate committee, just on mental health back in 22. You know, I think that discussion, we could spend weeks upon weeks just on the mental health portion. You know, what can we do to hopefully get people the help so they aren't what I would refer to as disturbed and think it's okay to shoot through windows at little children. But your committee, Senator Latz, I appreciate the opportunity to be here, but I think those are 2 subjects I think we should be discussing. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Senator Draheim. Yes, the theme here is how to reduce gun violence, not only how to reduce guns. So obviously there's an emphasis among some of us that you can't address reducing gun violence without addressing the guns themselves. But even on our side of the aisle, there's a recognition that it's more complex than that alone. And the GOP has been consistent in indicating that it's about the people and not the guns, but it is still about how to reduce gun violence. And that's why you'll see on the agenda, the proposals from Monday included a number of proposals that dealt with mental health issues or other things that could be focused on reducing gun violence. So those conversations are welcome. And they don't have to be, and we are not going to act like a Senate committee. We are not an official body. We're not vetting draft legislation here. The idea is to have proposals and language and, would be vetted at a different time, different forum. We're trying to get conceptual agreements where we can here. So just saying mental health generally is not enough, I would suggest. If there's a particular proposal about how to address mental health in a way that would help reduce the incidence of the small fraction of people with mental illness who actually are violent, then let's talk about a specific proposal. School safety, I've made a note of that you've raised those two issues. And so let's have those conversations, but please let's focus, have a specific proposal for us to get our arms around so we can say, yeah, we like that direction, or no, we don't. That's all I'm asking for. If there are others, I mean, the agenda for today was created based upon what we had received for consideration and intake on Monday. And you will recall at the end of Monday's meeting, I said basically the same thing. We are still welcoming proposals for consideration today. So if you have a specific idea you'd like us to address, we will try to make space for that as well. It's my goal and intent. Just please formulate a specific proposal, and we're obviously not going to have testimony, but we will certainly have a description of a proposal in time for some conversation about it. Right. Senator Howe.
Thank you, Senator Latz. And apparently, we didn't have a lot of time from Wednesday to Friday at 10 a.m. to put a lot of things in draft form. The other piece is that I appreciate your shift in actually being willing to have a discussion on stuff that wasn't discussed on Monday, because that's not what the email that we received. The email we received said that there was not going to be any discussion on any new proposals that weren't heard on Monday. So that's the direction that we took.
All right, well, I don't know that I've seen that email at this point, but my closing remarks on Monday said we are still open and would welcome input from our GOP members with specific proposals. So that's the way I'm approaching, and this obviously is a broader question than just what to do about guns, and that's reflected in the testimony that we've had and in the conversations beyond us. There are probably 1,000 ideas around the country about how to reduce gun violence. We obviously can't take up all of that, but I do want to try to meet the moment here with some urgency, because we've had a horrible summer and starting of the fall with gun violence, and I think it's time that we try to take some more proactive steps. Senator Howe.
Thank you, Senator Latz. And I think the, one way you reduce gun violence is just reduce the acceptance of violence across all. Gun violence is just a piece of the violence that we're facing in our society today. And it's a tool that these folks are using. We need to reduce the heat and the rhetoric and actually come down and actually being civil to one another again in our society, and not believing that violence is the answer. Because violence is what we're dealing with. People think that going after people is the right answer, and we're not being, and I think that goes down to our kids, and we need to protect our kids from all violence, whether it's bullying, whether it's verbal violence, sexual violence. I don't care what kind of violence it is, we have to deal with that. And gun violence is just one piece of that, and it's a violent deal, and we have to come to a better answer with just cherry picking one item. We need to deal with this across the board. And you're seeing, I look at what just happened in Minneapolis this week, just this weekend. In the last 12 hours, there was 12 people shot. We have to address that, but it's not necessarily, my concern is, are we going to put more ink on paper? You're going to address, you're going after an object, and I think these bills, if you pass them, are going to get tied up in court, and we won't actually get anything substantially done to actually protect our kids and to help our kids deal with this. And that's my concern, is if we just focus on the gun, this issue is going to be tied up in court, and by the time it actually becomes, and we implement it, if it ever gets implemented, we will still face more deaths.
Senator Howe, if you have a specific proposal for us to consider, we would love to hear that. I think we can all agree we need to reduce violence. I, for one, am not going to be stopped from proposing solutions that I think on their merits would accomplish our goals because of the concern about future litigation or delay in implementation or effectiveness. I have Senator Westland wanted to speak, and then Senator Mohammed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you again to our colleagues. I appreciate the dialogue because I do think that this is where we have to start. We have to have conversations about this, but we can't get so dug in to our positions that we aren't actually having a dialogue. And I do not view this as a one and done. We're having a working group. We're going to talk about it. We're done. I have plenty of proposals and ideas for things that I will probably wait until the regular session on. I do think there is a sense of urgency, and I'm sure everyone walked out of this meeting on Monday feeling kind of devastated, and just that was very difficult. And I want to acknowledge the fact that it's not only difficult for us, but our staff was also very emotionally impacted by the stories that we heard on Monday. This affects all of us. So we do need to continue this conversation. I will say what I said Monday and repeat what Senator Latz said, is that we are specifically talking about gun violence, not violence generally, and that's certainly a topic for another day as well. But we are here to talk about gun violence. And the thing about addressing the problem is it is complex. It is multifaceted. And the one thing that will be helpful is we have actual data and research to provide guidance to us for some evidence-based responses. Mental health always comes up in conjunction with gun violence conversations, but the fact is most of the people who commit acts of gun violence are not mentally ill. And so I think we can't hang it just on that. Senator Lucero, I appreciate, you mentioned many times people are evil. I don't know quite what to do with that or how we're defining evil, but I think that that's a little bit too simplistic of an explanation for things. I think we have people who are online and spend a lot of time online, subject to radicalization and extremism, that they are just disconnected from community and from the world. What's the role that our social media companies, for instance, should be playing in terms of identifying rhetoric and extremist rhetoric that is actually crossing that line into inciting violence or radicalizing people? There are just so many things that we need to talk about and address, and things that need a thoughtful approach that probably can't happen in a special session, turning things around that quickly. But I hope that this precipitates a conversation, and I hope that everybody here is interested in having that conversation. What is important and what has often been missing is the lack of research. And we know that for a long, long time, the CDC was not funded or permitted to do real deep research on gun violence. We have an excellent organization here, the Violence Project, that I believe actually the Gun Caucus supports as well, because they do good, solid research, and they have been partners with us in this conversation and will continue to be. And I think we need to continue to see how they can help us understand all of the different factors. And I guess the last thing I'll say is that I understand that this was this working group came together somewhat quickly, but it is my understanding that that Leader Johnson knew about this a week, like very early September. We had the names of the working group put together by the 9th. We all managed to throw some stuff together or had some things in the hopper. And I think the dialogue is ongoing. I don't think there's a deadline for providing things. It's just harder to have conversations when we don't have specific bill language in front of us. But let's work on it. And like Senator Latz, I'm happy to have conversations about all of these things. I need to have a conversation, though, that does include talking about what we do about the proliferation of certain types of weapons that we heard testimony from doctors talk about, the damage, the physical damage that they do. So I appreciate this. In sincerity, this is an issue that hits really close to home to me for so many reasons, as it does for many. I really want us to do something about this. And I desperately want us to do something together as best we can. And I hope we will continue to have that conversation.
Senator Mohammed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I know we want to get into the discussion, so I'll keep it short. I have a few things. Number one is I think hearing this conversation can be very triggering for people who have experienced what they've experienced over the last month, rightfully so. I think folks understand what happened in our communities is violence, and I think they wholeheartedly condemn it. I certainly do. Senator Latz does. Everyone on this side of the aisle does. I know you all do, which is why you're here. And I think the question is, what are we going to do about it? Because this moment does need to meet the urgency that it deserves. And I think these families deserve that. And so I think what I want to center us in is the testimony that came from one of the moms who said, if you want to look at my child in the eye while I clean from her back the wounds of the gun, then tell her you don't want to ban the gun that did that to her. You have every right to say that to her, and you'll have the opportunity to do that. But you also have the opportunity to do the right thing, meet the moment. And I think mental health is a part of that conversation. We've had hundreds of millions of dollars we put into policies over the last 3 years, and every single one of your members voted against that. And that's unfortunate. But we have to be honest about the decisions that we make in this body. I care about mental health. I have families who suffer from it. I have friends who do. I have community who does. We all do. It is not something that is not fixable, but it does require a conversation that's not politicized. And guns require a conversation that's not politicized. And so I hope that we can work together to do something about it, because these families deserve that.
I'm going to lay the foundation here. I'm sorry, Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate these opening comments. And I think, again, just to reiterate from the meeting on Monday, that all of us are devastated, not just on this committee or task force or work group, but across the state, across the country. These are important and complex questions, as both, Mr. Chair, you've alluded to, and others. And as I was reflecting on the testimony and the remarks of Monday, as I'm since then, over these last 2 days, as I'm reflecting on what is the appropriate response, one of those, all the testimony that we heard was, again, incredible, and we thank the testifiers for that. Among those that stood out was the gentleman who came and asked what changed. And since then, I've been thinking about what has changed. And I brought a book with me today because I didn't know if it'd be appropriate to cite it at all, but this conversation, it's motivated me to share just a few comments from this. This is a book that I have been reading. It has nothing to do with politics, nothing to do with anything. It's called Atomic Habits, if any of you have ever heard of it. And the subtitle is An Easy and Proven Way to Build Good Habits and Break Old Ones. Nothing to do with politics at all, or policy. But I had gotten through chapter 6, and I wanted to read a few, just some small snippets here that are directly related to what was just said as we consider what do we do going forward as we consider what has changed? What is the appropriate response? How do we ensure safe environments, safe communities? How do we ensure safe schools? And again, I'm just reading a handful of snippets here that stood out for me that were directly related to that. Environment is an invisible hand that shapes human behavior. Despite our unique personalities, certain behaviors tend to arise again and again under certain environmental conditions. In 1936, psychologist Kurt Lewin wrote a simple equation that makes a powerful statement. Behavior is a function of the person in their environment. As a result, you can imagine how important it is to live and work in environments that are filled with productive cues and devoid of unproductive cues. Thankfully, there is good news in this respect. You don't have to be a victim of your environment, you can be an architect of it. 3 more small snippets. Environment design is powerful not only because it influences how we engage with the world, but also because we rarely do it. Most people live in a world others have created for them, but you can alter the spaces you live and work to increase your exposure to positive cues and reduce your exposure to negative ones. Environment design allows you to take back control and become an architect of your life, a designer of your world, not merely a consumer of it. Our behavior is not defined by the objects in the environment, but by our relationship with them. In fact, this is useful to think about the influence the environment has on our behavior. Stop thinking about the environment as filled with objects and start thinking about it as filled with relationships. Think in terms of how you interact with spaces around you. And finally, if you want behaviors that are stable and predictable, you need an environment that is stable and predictable. A stable environment where everything has a place and purpose is an environment that where habits can easily form. And so I thought that was very relevant to this national discussion we're having of the environment and healthy and unhealthy behaviors. And I have a longer list that I won't read now, but there are things that have changed in these last several decades that I think are contributing factors to where we're going and why we're seeing difference. One of the constants has been the number and type of firearms, the accessibility of firearms. That's remained a constant for decades. And what has changed, though, is our environment and our relationship within the environment, how we act towards each other,
Senator Lucero,
et cetera.
I'm
So
gonna
with
let
that,
you.
Mr. Chair, yep, I'm done. With that,
okay.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to add these remarks as we're considering these considerations. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Would also appreciate if you have any specific proposals for us to consider as a working group to address what you are identifying as environmental issues. This working group is intended to consider specific proposals for possible recommendation to the legislature for statutory changes or for funding. All right, so I really want to encourage every member to focus now on that. Before we go any further in this conversation, dove in, I guess I sort of started it, but I do want to, in terms of decorum, note that as in the first hearing on Monday, signs, noise, or demonstrations that disrupt the committee's work may result in removal from the hearing room. Quiet must be maintained in the committee hearing room, and verbal discussion should occur outside of the committee room. So if anyone here wants to have conversations, you're welcome to step out, have your conversation, then return to the committee room. The hearing is to consider members' proposals, reiterating my offer to GOP members to give us specific proposals to consider as well. So with that said, what I'd like to do first is to turn to the item on our agenda, the consideration of Monday's proposals. Item A is the safe storage bill. This is a bill that there has been language drafted. The bill itself has been around for a while. There are copies in the back of the room. I don't think the intent here is for us to vet specific language. The goal here is to see if there's consensus on whether or not there ought to be passed a safe storage bill that accomplishes the stated goals. So first, I guess I want to ask if the person who presented, Senator Gustafson, please just stay right here. But just give us a brief synopsis of the points of this proposal so that we can set the table for our discussion. And do any members need a copy? We can get them to you of the proposal itself. Okay, I guess we're good to go. Senator Gustafson.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to make sure well, you know, I presented this probably about 20 times, so I'll just go from everything I know. Safe storage is simple. We could also refer to it as secure storage, but basically when a firearm is not in your possession, it must be kept somewhere safe, and that includes a gun safe or a lock. All of those are fine. It can be loaded, but it must be in a safe or it must be locked. We know this is that there are already laws in place that are after the fact, right? If a gun was not secured properly and an accident or a crime was committed, there is some recourse for that, but this is meant to be preventative. Thank you, Senator Bolden. And much in the way that we look at, for instance, carrying or texting while driving, right? There are times where people are doing that. It can cause accidents. It is a threat to our safety. But just having the bill be law now has prevented more people from doing that. It's a good practice to have in place. I want to mention that one of the things, the biggest goal of safe and secure storage is to protect our children. And as I mentioned on Monday, I had presented this several times. We had at one time significant bipartisan support, and then unfortunately we're not able to get it across the finish line. But in the time that we spent on that and came this close to getting it there through the Senate, we lost more, there were more accidents happened. Can I say here with all certainty that those would have been prevented with this law? Of course not. We're not going to legislate our way out of every problem. But I will say that a 4-year-old in Brooklyn Center accidentally shot himself in August after finding a gun in his uncle's room. A 12-year-old in St. Paul accidentally shot himself in the head in August. These are some of the things that we can do, and this is where policy really can make a difference. It can prevent these tragedies, and maybe that doesn't get reported as much, but this is common sense. In fact, I would say it's so common sense that if you're like me and you belong to Pheasants Forever or Ducks Unlimited, if you're a hunting family like myself, we keep all of our guns stored safely and secure, and it is recommendation by those groups and the NRA that you keep your gun safe and locked away when you're not using it. That is a recommendation from them. I took my concealed carry class last year, also a recommendation from them. So these are all very much accepted, common practice and best practice for people who are responsible gun owners. And I know the next thing is to say, well, of course, law-abiding citizens will always follow the law, but what about the people that don't? Again, this will help in case somebody tries to steal your weapon. If it is secured, that means people who shouldn't have your gun won't be able to access it. I'll also mention, too, that many of the guns that we see, which we addressed also, too, with some of our other policies, are guns that were obtained illegally. This is one of the things that would prevent that as well. So I know we've had rigorous debate about this. I'd love to hear more about what you're thinking, but this was something that we had bipartisan support for, and I hope that we can get there again. But happy to open the conversation and appreciate everybody for being at least open to talking about it.
Is there any discussion? Senator Drahan.
Thank you, Chair Latz and Senator Gustafson, for bringing the idea forward. You said you presented this like 20 times. Well, why didn't it pass when you brought it forward before.
Senator Gustafson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator Draheim. I might have been exaggerating. Sometimes when you're in the thick of a bill, it feels like it's 20 times. It might be, 12. I would say that, some of the reasons why are not maybe my story to tell, but they do center around people being, feeling as if they, I'm trying to find a way to describe it without divulging private conversations, but there were people who just felt uncomfortable after it was made public that they supported it. And so I think that kind of goes to show the polarizing that gun bills can bring, the polarizing atmosphere that carrying a gun bill can bring, and the amount of, the people who are on the opposite side of maybe a gun policy that I might want to pass. They're well-funded, they're well-organized, and they're very connected. And that can be very intimidating when you're trying to put yourself out there to do what you know is right for your community, but the amount of pressure sometimes can be too much to take.
Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I woke up and one of the headlines I saw this morning was from the Star Tribune. We had another shooting, as Senator Howe had referenced. And the Star Tribune is reporting one of the shootings took place near the Interstate 35 exit ramp where drug dealing and drug use are carried out in broad daylight. The other shooting took place at an unauthorized homeless camp on the property of an individual, a prominent Minneapolis landlord who has defied city officials and refused to shut it down. This is not normal, O'Hara said of the violence. Recent evidence seems to contradict him. There is a new norm in areas of drug violence.
Senator Lucero, I don't mean to cut you off, but we're discussing a safe storage proposal. Will you please keep your remarks right now focused on the proposal before this group?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Senator.
I am about to make a remark to the bill before us, the proposal.
Thank you.
As part of that,
That's
I
all
need
I
to
need.
lay context for my remark.
Okay. Appreciate
The
it.
habit that I've seen, Mr. Chair, is you continue to interrupt and cut us off when we're making remarks here. So if I could please allow to lay a preface for my remarks to the proposal before us, that would be appreciated, because these are important conversations.
Senator Lucero, you will recall that I just gave you a lot of leeway to read a number of passages from a book about the general environment in our community without
And you cut me off.
Without any link to any specific, actually, where I was going to cut you off, Senator Lucero, was not because I was trying to stop you from saying something, but because some members of the audience started to get verbal about their disagreement with the factual assertion that you made. And I had not yet laid the foundation at the beginning of the hearing about proper decorum and protocol for this gathering. That was the only reason. I was going to let you finish, and then you said, well, you were just about done anyway. So all I'm asking is that we spend more of our time focusing on the proposals and maybe less of our time laying groundwork and context, although I know we can't separate all of that importantly. I'm only asking for some conciseness as we approach this discussion, understanding that we have limited time and capacity here today. So thank you, Senator Lucero. Please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There are people in areas of the state where violence has become the commonplace. Drug use, gang activity are major contributing factors. The point I was going to make was, and am making, I'm highly concerned about people that live in neighborhoods such as this. If they want to protect and defend themselves and their families in a very quick moment, because things happen in a flash of a second. Access to be able to defend themselves is critically important. I'm concerned about the proposal because it would limit their ability in a manner to defend themselves, and it might cause further additional people, innocent people, inability to defend themselves in a, again, blink of an eye. We saw the reports earlier this year, but with Representative Hortman and Senator Hoffman, the tragedy there. Just a split second is all that matters. And if firearms are locked away, especially somebody like myself, I don't have children. And there are many across the state who it's just adults in the house. We should not be in a position to say you are going to have to lock up your firearms because we, the government, deem it safer, and we're going to limit your ability to respond in a fraction of a second to defend yourself. I have grave concerns with the proposal before us, Mr. Chair.
Senator Gustafson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator Lucero. First of all, if you are in possession of your weapon, then it does not need to be stored. You're in possession of it. So if you are, as you described, living in that moment and you want quick access, as I know you do, you could holster your gun and have it in your possession. No one's taking that away from you. Second of all, I would just say that as somebody who was on the list multiple times on June 14th and received a phone call where they didn't know where he was and if he was on his way, and I do not live that far from where our colleagues were shot and killed, we were able, in a moment's notice, to grab our firearms so that we could protect ourselves. I know what that fear is like. Everybody on this table knows what that fear is like, at least on this side. I don't want us to get down this road where we have to compare tragic moments with each other so that we can feel as if that justifies us not doing anything on gun policy. What we're talking about is when you're not in possession of your gun, make sure it is secured somewhere safe. That is reasonable. I mean, the majority of Minnesotans across the political spectrum, gun owners and non-gun owners, agree on that. And when, last time we presented it, there were people bringing up all sorts of really strange scenarios. What if a cow comes at me? What if I need to have it in a what if? I don't know. But the point is that when you're not in possession of a gun that could hurt somebody, as I've just talked about, specifically children are usually the most affected, lock it up. Put a trigger lock on it, put it away in a secure storage so that it will not harm anyone. That's all we're asking. It is a completely reasonable ask that has quite a bit of support. I mean, there are so many other states that do this, and they're fine. And we will be too. So that's my response.
Any other discussion? Senator Matthews.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did want to look up and see the example cited, and it does appear that the individual with the 4-year-old that was mentioned did get charged. It appears that statute 609-666 already prescribes a gross misdemeanor to someone who negligently stores or leaves a loaded firearm in a location where the person knows or reasonably should know that a child is likely to gain access unless reasonable action is taken to secure the firearm against access by the child. So we do have it covered in law. I'd have to compare what exactly this adds to it. And it does appear that it's a good thing that there are criminal charges in the example that was cited.
Thank you, Senator Matthews. I would note that we have laws that can be enforced after the fact, but we also have laws that can be tools for education and prevention, more than just a threat of criminal consequences being the deterrent. And in my view, a safe storage bill, like a ban on handheld devices while driving, would be both. There'd be an education campaign, there would be people become aware of best practices, they would understand more about it. Something newly specifically and more explicitly illegal than just sort of a negligent storage theory would help prevent these deaths from happening rather than coming back after the fact and saying, well, you should have known that maybe this wasn't a good idea and we can convict you on that front. So that's why I think a safe storage bill would be particularly valuable. Besides that, it's the best practices of every gun advocate that I've become aware of as well. Any further discussion? Senator Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just help me understand exactly where did this go. So if by looking at this, it doesn't mean that if I lock my house when I leave and someone breaks in and steals a gun, I'm going to be charged. That's what it looks like, because I failed to have a binary, some lock on the trigger lock, or if I fail to spin the dial on my gun safe. I mean, is it not enough that I lock my house and someone breaks in and steals one of my guns, that now I'm going to be charged that somebody stole my gun, but I didn't spin the dial on my gun safe, or I had it? Is that where we're at with this? That we're going to take someone that locks their house, but someone kicks in the door and steals their firearm, that now that wasn't secure enough? The lock on my door of my house was not secure enough, and now because that firearm got stolen, now I'm charged?
Senator Gustafson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator Howe. So, first of all, you should lock up your guns anyways because they're expensive. So there's that. Second of all, you would get a misdemeanor for that, like a misdemeanor, not a gross misdemeanor, a misdemeanor for that. So that would be a charge that could happen. Could happen.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Howe.
Thank you. So now, how does that reflect on the ability to purchase a gun in the future? You get a background check and you got misdemeanor that you didn't lock up your firearm, that now, does that prevent me from carrying or purchasing another firearm?
Mr. Chair, Senator Howe, I will have to look into that more, but a misdemeanor is the same as a speeding ticket, so. Speeding danger,
Yeah.
sorry. This is,
A speed and danger speeding ticket would be
okay.
endangering other people or property. Regular speed is a petty misdemeanor. No, that's quite true. But the endangerment component would be the same here, and that's why.
I misspoke, I'm sorry. Yeah. But it is still a misdemeanor. I will look into what that means for future gun purchases, and I can get back to you on that.
We're going to take just a few more minutes on this, or we're never going to get beyond the first couple of proposals here. So, Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for that clarity. A petty misdemeanor is not a criminal offense. Misdemeanor is a criminal offense. And what I'm concerned about is a person whose house was broken into, in just one of a million scenarios, right, that we could come up with. A person whose house was broken into is a victim. They were violated in their most intimate place, their home, place of abode. To charge the victim now with as a criminal offense, that is shocking, and that's not the place that we need to go, is criminally prosecuting a victim whose house was broken into. I can't support the proposal as it's written. Thank you.
Well, I just have to say, I think that if someone's house was broken into and the police respond and they see cocaine on the table, they're going to get charged with cocaine possession as well. I mean, you don't get immunity because someone broke into your house, and that's what brought the authorities to come to the attention of the contents of the house. And the likelihood of there being a burglary with a house broken into compared to the likelihood of a 3-year-old getting a hold of an unsecured handgun that's left in a desk drawer with a bullet in it, I think you're a lot more likely to lose a child. And the number of lives we've saved that way is a lot more valuable than the number of people who can get charged with a misdemeanor. If someone breaks into their house and the law enforcement finds out the firearm wasn't stored properly, I don't know. To me, I would choose life. Any further comments before we take a consensus assessment on this?
Thank you, Senator Latz. So I think almost 400,000 guns are stolen each year. We had a conversation a minute ago about community gun violence, which is a concern for communities. And we know that stolen guns are the ones that end up being trafficked and are, they are used in an illegal market, and they do create a lot of tragedy within communities. It seems to me that if we're trying to get to gun violence as an issue, making sure that people are not easily able to steal guns and then market them illegally would be an important conversation to have about preventing tragedies in our communities. Gun violence takes a lot of forms, and we talk a lot about mass shootings, but community gun violence proliferates, and it creates tragedies within communities as well. Suicides are another type of gun tragedy, and so we need to take a look at all of these things and what contributes to those things. So I don't know, it just seems to me that if you have a lethal weapon, one of the responsibilities, and as Senator Gustafson said, is recommended by any number of organizations, is safely storing those items. I would agree with Senator Latz that protecting a child from harming themselves or others is probably more important here.
Senator Howe, final
Thank you.
remarks.
I guess one of the questions I have, though, is it's already a crime to leave a firearm accessible to a child. That's already a crime. I guess my question is, though, Mr. Chair, you say a consensus. How do you going to determine that consensus here? Are we just going to have a voice vote? Is it going to be a vote? How are you going to determine the consensus?
That's a fair question, Senator Howe. I've been trying to figure out how to do it in a fair and productive manner here. This is, as you know, not a formal committee or anything like that, and I'm not. My intention was at first to ask, are there any objections to advancing this proposal as a recommendation of the working group? And if there are, then I think we just try to get a sense of, how many objections are there, and whether there's a sense that a majority of the working group would, not a pure majority. For me, I think it needs to be a bipartisan approach. That's the whole purpose of this working group, is to try to find some bipartisan solutions to this. I was just going to ask, are there any objections to advancing either the specific proposal or the proposal in concept with perhaps some nuance with regard to, any impediments to future firearm purchases? Questions that get raised in the course of discussion can be fleshed out in details. But it's the concept that I'm trying to get a sense on. Senator Drahan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And, Senator Mohammed sits on pretty much every committee that I'm on, so she knows I love amendments. And that nuance is the devil's always in the details. And I see some of the proposals, in my opinion, have some unconstitutional language in them that I would have a hard time supporting, just on the fact that it's unconstitutional, and we're supposed to uphold the Constitution. So to me, it's 6-5. We're going to have a majority of whatever you guys propose. So I think I would benefit more, and I think my constituents would benefit more with the discussion, more than a vote that means nothing on some loosely written proposals that aren't ironed out, haven't been vetted. Most of these would have multiple stops in different committees and be vetted. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Senator Westland.
So we don't have precise language that we agree on, though. I think the basic question I would ask is there any consensus on I think what Senator Latz was trying to get to, is there any consensus on working together to develop a safe storage bill? I mean, either you agree in principle on that and are willing to work with Senator Gustafson to come up with language that would be support it, or you just are opposed to the concept altogether. And if you're opposed to the concept altogether, I mean, I guess that answers the question whether or not it's something that would have bipartisan support. If it's something that with some work and some tweaks, in theory, you could see yourself supporting, I think that's valuable information for us to have, even if we're not taking votes on things because we're not a committee. I just want to know where people stand. Either it is a hard no under any circumstance, or there is a world in which you envision that something like this could pass with some work with Senator Gustafson.
So I think that's a good synopsis of how to approach. Senator Gustafson, you were reaching for your, or shall we just go ahead? Let's just go ahead, Senator Gustafson.
I just want to say that I would love to have more conversations with you on this. I do think that we can get to a consensus. There are 7 states who have a bill just like ours, and I don't know that there are constitutional issues, but that might be different in our language, and would love to work with you on that. But I do think this is something that we could come back to a bipartisan agreement on.
So let me just ask now, is there, I can ask, is there any objection to moving forward with a discussion with an eye toward finding agreement on language for a safe storage type bill? Or let me just ask it that way. Senator Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, I don't think it's right for us to tell an author of a bill that they can't continue to work on a bill. I think if you've got an idea for a bill, continue to work on the bill. I mean, and until you get, and we can always work across the aisle to get consensus and to build that. And I think it's kind of not a great idea for us to be able to tell the author, yeah, put this one on the back burner, I don't think it's going to go. I think they should continue to work that.
Senator Howe, are you volunteering then to work with Senator Gustafson to try to come up with language that might advance the concept of a safe storage bill? Or is anyone on the GOP side of this committee willing to say that they are comfortable with the idea and are willing to work on language that might be acceptable?
Well, Mr. Chair, this, we're 5 folks. There's 33 of us on this side of the aisle. Just because we don't, and we may or may not, I can't speak for the other members of the committee. I own 2 gun safes. I sometimes forget to spin the dial on one of them. I'll be the first to admit that. One of them locks automatically, so I don't have to worry about it. But what I'm saying is, I'm not probably there to where I'm going to have that discussion, but I'm sure there's probably other members of my caucus that are interested in having that discussion.
Well, right now there are those members in this room, and that's who is faced with the question. That was your caucus's decision whom to appoint to this working group. So I'm asking members of this working group now. Senator Drahan.
Thank you. When I look at the bill and hear the discussion, as we heard over the last 18 months on this subject, Senator Matthews brought up that statute 60966 or whatever it was, where the example given was already illegal. And the person that handled the firearm incorrectly, in my opinion, has been charged with a crime. I would rather see the money spent on educating the public on proper gun storage, what I call common sense. If we were going to spend money and time, I would support a bill that educated the public on how to safely store their guns, which I think in my district, because all our districts are different, the 7 counties I represent, I think the majority of the people, guns are a very open and used item, and a lot of trap shooting in my district. Kids are trained at a very young age, the proper way to handle firearms. Could that improve? Of course it could. But that's where for my part of the state, because we're supposed to represent our own districts, that would be more beneficial, in my opinion, for the whole state, is education on storage, rather than having a redundant bill.
Members, I have a pretty good idea, I think, of where the members on my side of the aisle would fall on this proposal. So I'm just going to ask directly now, and then we're going to end. Are there any members of the GOP on this working group that find enough merit in the concept of a safe storage bill that criminalizes failure to safely store firearms, that they'd be willing to work with Senator Gustafson to come up with something that could get GOP support and pass the legislature?
Chair?
Senator Draymond.
You know, it didn't pass before because it didn't have bipartisan support. You guys have the majority in the Senate. So if you wanted to pass this before, you could have.
Senator Draymond, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but that's not the question I'm asking.
But
I'm asking if there's anyone on your side of the aisle that's willing to work toward passing a conceptual
and
safe storage bill.
I'll speak for myself. I can't speak for everybody else.
If you're not, then don't say yes.
I would not support the bill as drafted.
That's not my question, but I guess.
Well, I
you're
told you
entitled
what
to
I
your
would
position.
support, Senator Latz, but
Education.
Yeah, and you phrased the question to admit that part. So that is what I'm passionate about. If I want to save people's lives, I think education will do more good than another bill
Senator Muhammad,
to do the same thing we already have on statute, Senator Latz, in the examples given. So we could pass more laws, but it's really not going to save people. We need to educate people. We need to arrest the people out shooting up the streets of Minneapolis. We need to charge them. We need to prosecute them. We need minimum sentences.
Senator Muhammad.
Thank you, Senator Draham. And I think you're somebody who often works with members. You've certainly worked with me, even if at the end you didn't agree to bills. And I think even if you disagree with the way the bill currently is drafted, members on this side of the aisle are asking you, what would you need to get to, not even a yes, do you want to work on the idea of the policy? And what we're hearing is no after no after no. Members on this body are committed to working on that.
Mr. Chair. I'm ready to move on to the next item. It's pretty clear that unless you're going to say yes, unless you're willing to say that, yes, I can get to some place on the concept of criminalizing failure to keep firearms safely and securely stored, then there is no GOP member that is willing to do that. And we'll move on to the next bill on the agenda, and we'll see if we can reach any consensus on that. I'm not going to spend another half an hour debating the language in the safe storage bill, or that will end up being the message, that the GOP is unwilling even to participate in these conversations. So I don't want that to be the message. I want this to be a good conversation aiming toward consensus. Simple question is there objection to this, or anyone willing to work on trying to find a safe storage bill with this basic concept? If no, that's fine. I think that's just the way it is. Senator Heitzman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that your characterization of the GOP is unfair. You have had Senator Draheim suggest education, and you say, oh, the answer is no. You're saying absolutely no. You're labeling us as not being pro-safe storage. All of us agree safe storage is a good idea, right? We have a different idea of how to get there. But to say that we're absolute no when Senator Draheim said, let's talk about educating the public about it, that's not fair.
So thank you for that, Senator Heitzman. And I've been asking for proposals from the GOP at least since September 9th, when I personally spoke with Senator Johnson, notified him we were putting this working group together. I wanted bipartisan input and participation and soliciting of proposals. And the proposal before us is not an education proposal. I'm trying to get a sense of whether there's support for the proposal before us. If you don't support it, then that's fine. If you support something else like education, that's fine. Make a proposal. to put together a statewide education plan for safe storage practices. That's fine, but that proposal hasn't been brought to us either. So right now, I'm going to do the equivalent of calling the question on proposal number, letter A on our agenda, the safe storage bill. Is there anyone on the GOP side that is comfortable with the concept contained in this bill and be willing to work with Senator Gustafson to try to advance the concept, whatever the language might be worked out? All right. I've repeated the question 3 or 4 times already. Oh, my God. Okay, you want to take a vote on it? Is that what you'd prefer? We can take a vote. I was trying to avoid going down that road. I don't mind asking for a voice vote. Do you support safe storage or not? Do you want to go down that road? We can. I'm trying to ask it in a more nuanced way to leave open more possibility for bipartisan cooperation here without forcing people to be on the record, if you will. But I'm not getting a lot of cooperation in my judgment to try to address this. So I'm just going to declare the chair's conclusion that there is no bipartisan agreement toward advancing the safe storage bill in concept. And we're going to move on to the binary trigger ban. I believe this is also Senator Gustafson's proposal. Could you please give us 30 seconds, Senator Gustafson, on what the binary trigger ban proposal is?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the bill reinstates the binary trigger ban. Under current law, firearms cannot include a trigger activator. A trigger activator can be a device attached to a firearm that allows the rate of fire to increase to that of a machine gun, or a device that allows semi-automatic firearm to shoot more than one shot, either with a single pull of a trigger or by harnessing the energy of a firearm to continue firing without additional physical manipulation of the trigger. This is the binary trigger ban that was brought to us in result after law enforcement in Burnsville, 2 police officers were tragically murdered and a first responder. This had the support of both law enforcement and as a public safety common sense gun bill. This is so it is essentially something that can increase the amount of shots that you can fire.
Senator Gustafson, at the hearing on Monday, there was an amendment or language that was proposed regarding effective date. Would you be willing to take that off the table for the moment? So the question really is going to be about the policy proposal of having a binary trigger ban?
Mr. Chair, yes, absolutely.
That is what is before us right now. Is there any discussion about the proposed binary trigger ban? Are there any objections to the proposed binary trigger ban?
Mr. Chair?
Senator Howe.
So the folks that have a binary trigger on their gun, how would that look? So what happens afterwards? If they have one, what do they do? I mean, do they replace the trigger mechanism? Is there a cost to that to the state for making it now illegal? How does this work?
Senator Gustafson.
So, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator Howe. It would be illegal to sell in the state of Minnesota. If you have one, you're not allowed to possess it.
Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and a question for Senator Gustafson. So if someone has it, it's legal now, And if someone has it and they're no longer permitted to possess it, if this proposal were to become law, what does the process look like to depossess them of their legally obtained firearm?
Senator Gustafson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator Lucero. I admit I missed just the last tail end of your question, but you can't have it. So it's illegal to sell. If you have one, you cannot have it. You'll have to turn it in. Does that answer your question? Okay, then maybe you can repeat it for me because I missed the last part of your question.
Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator Gustafson. The question is to turn it in, is that firearm that was legally obtained that they're now required to turn in, I presume turn in means give to the government, are they going to be compensated in any way for the firearm that they're handing over to the government?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator Lucero. Yes, sorry, very different question. No, as it stands right now, no.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, that is clearly a violation of the Constitution. Clear violation. That's a taking. And you can't take private property from law-abiding citizens without compensating them. This is a hard no. It's a direct violation of the Constitution.
Senator Lucero, if there were a compensation plan passed with this, a buyback of all firearms that had a binary trigger legal under current law, would you support the proposal then?
I won't support anything unless I see it in writing before me.
All right, well then, Senator Lucero, I don't know why you're here, because the whole point of this working group was to not look at specific language, but rather to talk about concepts and proposals, ideas to try to move forward. If there were a legislative session and you were asked to put up a green vote or a red vote, then you can look at the language and decide if you support it. But I just addressed your objection to the binary trigger ban, the takings clause of the Constitution, by saying, okay, let's get rid of that taking and pay for it if they are turning in what becomes an illegal piece of property. If your objection is to the concept, then just say so. This is not complicated.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am here to have a serious conversation about safe schools, safe neighborhoods, and those perpetrators of evil who are using instruments, multifaceted instruments, to harm others. I do not think it's a productive conversation that you, Mr. Chair, and others are trying to characterize us. You're putting a very narrow box, and you're saying yay or nay. That's not a fruitful conversation. Last week, I don't know what conversations were had with who, but we were given approximately 36 hours to submit proposals by a 10 a.m. deadline. Then, members of your staff, after Monday and before today, said no more conversations will take place beyond what was discussed Monday, in direct contradiction from the conflicting messages that we're getting. So this seems to be rushed. It seems to be mischaracterization. It doesn't seem like it's a healthy, serious conversation. Minnesotans want to have real solutions to protect children in schools, to protect violence that's occurring in neighborhoods and communities against these drug dealers, against these gang bangers, and continuing to focus on law-abiding citizens and not compensating them for a taking and many other very large problems with these proposals is just not serious in addressing what's happening in our communities and schools to protect our children. So that's why I'm here, Mr. Chair.
Senator Lucero, this conversation's about 3 or 4 decades too late. You had a lot of time to come up with proposals. And I can tell you, after the Annunciation shooting, it took me 15 minutes to put together a 6 or 7 point broad-based proposal that I put out in a press statement as to how I thought we ought to address reducing gun violence in this state. It takes one Google search to come up with 1,000 different ways in which we could take steps to do this, some of which you might agree with, some of which you would not. 36 hours is more than enough time to put pen to paper or to type into the laptop and come up with a few proposals to put before this committee. So I'm sorry, that excuse is no longer valid as far as I'm concerned. And the yay or nay was to an incredibly broad-based question. Do you or don't you support the concept? If you're going to sit here and say you're not going to support anything unless you see every period and semicolon and word on paper and see if you like it, then you shouldn't be on this working group, because the idea was to look at concepts, ideas, policies to either move forward with and try to come up with language that can get votes or not. All right? If your presence here is simply to say no, 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 then that's your right. You were appointed by your caucus to be here, and that's your right. I'm not asking the questions that way. I'm going to ask if anyone else, or let me just rephrase it again. Is there anyone here who objects, or I should say, are there any members of the GOP who would support the concept of banning binary triggers in the state of Minnesota in a manner that would be constitutionally done? Okay. No members of the GOP support binary trigger ban. Let's move on to item C. Item C was my proposal. Actually, it was Senator Hoffman's proposal that I presented to increase the criminal penalties for impersonating a peace officer. The only change to current state law, which does make it illegal to impersonate a peace officer, is to increase the penalties for doing so. Are there any members of the GOP or the DFL that object to this proposal? Senator Drahan.
Thank you, Senator Latz, and thanks for filling in for Senator Hoffman on this. And I was here when Senator Limmer brought forward a previous bill that was very similar to this, if not almost identical. And I supported it then, the concept, and I would support it today. So I do think that's something we can work on, and I have supported it in the past.
Senator Matthews.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I do support this proposal. I have an idea that I want to put forward that I think we should also explicitly spell out, that there should probably be enhanced penalties both on the maximum end and on the minimum end for someone who commits a crime while falsely impersonating a police officer, because that gets at the heart, you know, and our tragic example from this summer is what's on the top of everyone's mind. Apparently there's been other reports I found out from some of my colleagues that it's happened before for some smaller crimes. Someone pretends to be a police officer and pulls someone over and is intending to do criminal. So like the tragic case from this summer, adding more penalties onto what's already likely to be a life sentence isn't going to affect that specific case, but there are smaller cases where it should be specifically called out that committing crimes while falsely dressed in a uniform should probably enhance the penalty just for that alone, in addition to the crime of impersonating a peace officer. That'd be my request for the topic.
Any other discussion? Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I don't recall correctly if it was just a peace officer impersonation or if it's perhaps other emergency personnel, firefighters, medical professionals. You know, again, as Senator Matthews just pointed out, anybody in a uniform, perhaps in a government or similar quasi-capacity. But I'm in favor of this concept, and perhaps there's opportunity to even broaden it for impersonation, because even if it were somebody impersonating a firefighter who comes to the door or in other contexts, it's definitely not safe. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
To answer your question, Senator Lucero, the proposal, the existing statute addresses peace officers only, and in the language with regard to vehicle markings, it addresses police, patrolman, sheriff, deputy, trooper, state patrol, conservation officer, agent, or marshal. And then the next paragraph, any lettering, marking, et cetera, identifying the vehicle as a law enforcement vehicle. So that's the specific proposal, but you and Senator Matthews have raised additional points that could certainly be discussed in the concept if this were to move forward. Any other discussion on this? I think we've reached consensus on this. Next item, D, the existing extreme risk protection orders law, or the red flag law. This was my proposal to fund an awareness campaign to increase awareness of and educate the public and law enforcement about the extreme risk protection orders. Is there any discussion or any support for this kind of an awareness campaign? Understanding the caveat I'm throwing out here is this would involve an appropriation clearly, and it's all subject to available funding, and the numbers are not specifically proposed. But the idea is the concept here. Any discussion on the concept? Senator Westland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would absolutely support this. I think that I believe we heard testimony Monday that this has been used successfully in the state of Minnesota, but there are a lot of people who are still unaware of this. There have been recent stories about this. I work in family law, and some of you may have read recently that a family law attorney and a family court judge were both threatened by a gentleman unhappy with his family court proceedings, and the local police department was able to file a petition for an extreme risk protection order. He made very specific threats, and then he was subsequently tried criminally. But we know that this public awareness campaign can be very important in intervening. We talk about mental health. There are people who are having a crisis. Oftentimes, gun deaths are suicide. We do know, and we can kind of lengthen the fuse between the impulse and the means, that we can often save lives. And so I believe this is, first and foremost, the underlying law is a very, very good law. It saves lives, and I think that we should do everything we can to make sure that there is public awareness of this.
Senator Drahan.
Thank you, Chair. Overall, I always, for the most part, I think we do a terrible job as a state communicating across the whole state. And a lot of our communication is directed mainly to the metro. And, I go all the way down to the Iowa border. So I do think anytime we can expand education for the general public, I'm for. I think there are some issues that I don't know if this is appropriate platform to talk about it, but about the accepting donations from outside groups and then First Amendment issues with people, maybe a billionaire that has funded attorneys in the office I know you used to work at, the Attorney General, to work on specific topics. And I think we could go down and this is way in the weeds, I apologize, members. But could it lead to that type of donation, that it is slanted towards a special interest group? And I'm thinking of a couple billionaires, and you can point fingers at our party too, because we have a couple billionaires too that play in politics. But that would be my concern. But overall, like I stated before, I'm all in favor of the education piece for protecting our public. So if that's a yes or no, I don't know. That's for your interpretation. But I would support communicating to the masses red flag laws. So thank you.
Senator Matthews.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did not support the bill when we enacted it into law a couple years ago. So I'm not supportive of the proposal that we have here. I do want to just call out just one question. I heard Monday that the stat was given that 85% of the orders that have been utilized were initiated by law enforcement. And I knew that we had that dual track method when the bill was considered and ultimately enacted. I am surprised that that number is that high. One of the concerns I was raising with that bill is I thought that it could be an avenue to get around like Fourth Amendment issues, requirements for law enforcement to get warrants and have probable cause. And seeing that it's being used 85% by law enforcement to only 15%, I assume, family members, that's problematic in my view, or very potentially problematic. So I think that the law probably needs to be reined back in and some guardrails put on for the law enforcement part of it. But you know, I still, as I stated a couple years ago, have a couple of constitutional problems in a couple different areas with the law as it was, and that's why I voted against it a couple years ago. So just wanted to highlight that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Matthews. And just to fill in the factual issues that you raised, the petitions, the data that I had was from a number of other people who have gotten data directly from the state court system and reviewed the actual petition contents. So the petitioners, the ones who filed the petition for the red flag or extreme risk protection order, in about 85% of those cases were law enforcement petitioners. Okay. The way I interpret that is that in some cases, law enforcement is the one that became aware of a situation and initiated the petition on their own without any other information. My guess is in most cases, there was a family member who could also have filed their own petition in court but might not know how to do that. But instead, seeing a risky situation, called 911 and said, what do I do? Or as a friend or a neighbor or someone else who is not allowed to file a petition directly because we did not want that broad a petitioner base. We wanted them to reach out to law enforcement first, so there'd be an intervening screening process, if you will. They said, I know a friend or a neighbor who is suicidal and has a gun in their house, and what do I do? And the police then look at the situation and say, well, the red flag law is a way to go, and initiates the petition. So I'm not sure you can conclude from the 85% figure that it's being abused by law enforcement. I think we intentionally directed the process through only two sources. Most of those were to go through law enforcement. The only other point I will make is that you mentioned a warrant, a way to maybe circumvent a warrant. A warrant is also an ex parte judicial order initiated by police with no input or due process from the subject of the warrant until after the fact. After a warrant is executed, if there is any criminal charge, and then in that criminal process, the then defendant could challenge the legitimacy or constitutionality of the issuance of that warrant. The red flag law works exactly the same way. So just to fill in the factual pieces of the points that you raised. Is there any other discussion on the proposed awareness campaign? Oh, the only other thing I'm going to add is that most of the firearm deaths in Minnesota are actually suicide, not homicide. And most of those suicides are basically white, middle-aged, rural men. So the red flag law specifically is saving more of those lives than any other lives. And the point of the public awareness campaign is so that people in the community will be aware that if they see a situation that concerns them, they can call law enforcement and ask for help, and that law enforcement does have this kind of a tool available to them to provide that help, rather than often in the past where they simply say, there's nothing we can do until they take actual criminal steps. So that's the point. Given the existing law, do we want to make the members of the public know or become more aware of the availability of this tool or mechanism for its use? So that's the question that I'm posing to this working group, is that kind of an awareness campaign. If we need guardrails around grants and awareness campaigns more generally, that's been an ongoing discussion in a lot of forums in the legislature. Senator Wesley.
I will just say the Violence Prevention Project did prepare a report to the legislature in January 2025 on our ERPO implementation. That may be very helpful. And they, I think, have agreed that a public awareness campaign will be important. We've gone through all the procedural fairness. It is the same process that is used for domestic violence orders for protection. There is an opportunity to be heard in court, but again, there's an immediate interaction to ensure safety either for that individual or for others. And I think we just need to get the word out to people that this is a tool that's available in order to save lives.
Are there any other objections to advancing this awareness campaign as a proposal for consideration of implementation? We have Senator Drahan, if I'm interpreting correctly, supports the concept. Senator Matthews does not. I'm looking for temperature from other members of the GOP as to what direction you think we ought to go on this. I also think I know where the DFLers are on this. No other input? Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was trying to withhold speaking on every provision, but since you solicited...
Why change now, Senator Lucero?
Exactly. Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. So my concern with this one is, this is strictly an appropriation. And law was changed that DPS can accept, I think it's what Senator Drahan was getting to, can accept contributions now from outside entities that are not government. I have a grave concern with that, and I voted against that provision, but that is now law. So since this is an appropriation, and since there are a number of billionaires out there and or advocacy groups that have significant number of funds that are concerned about this issue, they can make a contribution to DPS, and we, as a legislature, can use funds directed at saving and protecting children, focusing on saving our communities. And these other advocacy groups can make a contribution to DPS to promote an awareness campaign to this effect. So that's where I'm at, Mr. Chair, with the temperature. Thank you.
Any other input from members of the GOP on this? Split decision with some lack of clarity. All right, well, the discussion will inform future actions, I guess.
Chair, are we going to take a
Senator Drahan?
5-minute break?
It's a second request in about 2 seconds. Let's take a 5-minute break. going to approach it. We still are aiming for noon to be done with this process, and we've had some robust discussion up to this point on individual proposals. What I'm going to try to do now is to give about 5 minutes to each of the proposals, understanding there might be some that would take a little bit longer, but I'm hoping that we can focus our conversation concisely and succinctly on the proposal that is before us and on the merits or demerits of it, and more particularly, since I think we all have a pretty good idea of what each of these proposals are, since we spent all of Monday going through it, just giving an opinion as to whether you support advancing it or not advancing it. The next item before us then is item E on the agenda, the Violence Prevention Project Research Center funding. We had testimony on Monday about what that center is, what they do, and as with all these proposed funding or appropriations items, dollar amounts is all subject to need and understanding and available funds. But I'm asking, is there any consensus of opinion on whether or not there should be an appropriation to this research center for the work that they do? Anyone wish to give us their opinions on this right now? Senator Westland.
Thank you, Chair Latz. I have been a co-author on Senator Pappas's bills, and I frequently reach out to the Violence Prevention Project for information. They are nonpartisan. They do deep research. Their databases are exceptional. And as I mentioned earlier, I think one of the most important parts to addressing gun violence and gun violence prevention is having good evidence-based information to help drive policy. And I fully support providing funding for them. One of the suggestions that I had made to Senator Pappas is that I had been in some discussion with the Violence Prevention Project about having at least some designated funding about radicalization and so forth, because I do think that that's a very specific type of gun violence or cause of gun violence that we may want to look at. So I would love to work with Senator Pappas about maybe refining the request a little bit, but this will be money well spent if we are intent on really having good data, good research, and making good evidence-based policies.
Senator Draheim.
Thank you. You know, one of the things I think the public doesn't really get to see is how we have to prioritize our spending. And I love data. I've looked at it probably half a dozen different things while we've been sitting here. I think it's really important. But I also think protecting our schools is very important. So if I had to pick between this or spending this money to try to harden one school, like we saw in Lakeville, I would pick that over this. Not that I'm against the concept of this. Like I said, data is really useful. The other thing is, we know we have a problem with violence and bad people doing bad things. And I would rather spend the resources on addressing why we're not prosecuting more of these people. You hear report after report of people being let out after they've been arrested and doing another violent crime. And if we're going to look at protecting our citizens, I think that is something we should look at also. So it's all about priorities and where does this fit on the priority list for me. Thank you.
May I ask a clarification, Senator Draheim? If we had a world of unlimited resources, which is not the reality any of us lives in, but if you had a world of unlimited resources, would this be a resource that you think would be valuable to support?
I could see that if done properly, and I'm not very familiar with it. I'm not on your committee, Senator Latz. I don't play in. I try to avoid your committee as much as possible, like most of us do. No offense, but that's the truth. So I have not heard this come up in one of the committees I serve on, as far as I know. But I'm all for data. But I think first, in my district, if people want to prioritize, they're going to want to protect our children top foremost. And we can debate how to do that. So right now, I think there are a lot more important things to spend money on than this. Because we can have all the data in the world, but if we don't act on that data, what good is it? So that's my thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Drahan. Part of the purpose of the existence of this center is to not only gather data, but recommend strategies based on that data for protecting children, for preventing violence. And when we look at the shootings at the beginning of the summer, we look at Annunciation, we look at the Charlie Kirk incident, none of those shooters had prior criminal histories. So it's not only about, someone gets arrested and released, or anything like that, or mandatory minimum sentences, those kind of things. Part of it is how do we identify and intervene for people that are showing signs otherwise. And that's part of what this center does, is they try to find patterns in this data and recommend strategies like that.
And if you listen to, thank you, Senator Latz, and I think we're on the same page with that, but if you listen to the police scanner up here in the Twin Cities, which I have done on numerous occasions, as much as you can get off of the scanners now, but it's two types of calls for the most part. It's either a shots fired call or a drug overdose. And when you listen to those first responders going out on those calls, there's so many of them waiting for a backup. And, I can't imagine raising my family in that environment personally. That's why I live where I do. And one would think that we probably should have more resources available to respond on such awful calls. Last thing I want is a bullet hole in my house. And that would be awful. I would be very worried about my family. But we have parts of the state that we will not have people to respond to 911 calls. We had, during the last tragedy, which was awful, we all know that, we pulled resources out of rural Minnesota to come in and help fill in the gaps in Minneapolis. And that's great. That's probably what should have been done. But there are parts of the state where we rely on our state troopers. Thank you guys for being here. The men and women that work in the state trooper. My county that I live in normally has 2 officers on duty for the whole county. Most of my towns do not have police in them. They rely on the sheriff's office. They rely on the troopers to fill in the gap too. And if we're pulling them from the rural areas to come in and fix a problem, that we're not hiring enough policemen because we've pushed defund the police and have cut hundreds of officers from Minneapolis. And now we're pulling what little resources we have in Minnesota, in outstate Minnesota, to come help. I have a problem with that. So if you're going to ask me what to do with money, there's a lot of things I would fund before I would fund this. Thank you.
Senator Mohammed.
Thank you, Chair Latz. Senator Durham, thank you for your comments. I think I will be as kind as I can when I say I'm really sick and tired of the ways in which you all characterize the city of Minneapolis in the Twin Cities. There are millions of people who live in those cities who feel that our city is great and is actually doing extraordinary work. And when it comes to the issue of public safety, it's an issue that's facing the country, not just the city of Minneapolis. Crime happens everywhere. And when there are more people, there are more problems. We have an obligation to do something about it. And in this body, we've proposed over $300 million for law enforcement. And every single one of your members voted against that. So excuse me when I say I'm sick of the ways in which you all characterize, because we bring solutions. In this body, we're talking about a work group to focus on the issue that happened in our communities. Gun violence. You don't want to talk about gun violence. Then we'll bring our funding for research on violence, which you all talk about how you condemn it, but you don't want to fund it. We'll bring funding for public safety, but you don't want to fund it. Why? Because it's coming from Democrats. You all want to say that we're not working in good faith, but we are.
Mr. Chair.
Do. Don't cut me off.
Mr. Chair?
I'm not
Senator Lucero, after Senator Mohammed is done, I will recognize you.
Okay, well, she needs to refrain.
After Senator Mohammed is done, I will recognize you, Senator Lucero.
And I will say on this side of the body, I probably am one of the nicest people. I don't ever talk badly about Republicans or Democrats. I think it's important that we work together on things that we can agree on. And I think there are certain things we certainly will not agree. We come from completely different districts. But I know my district wants me to do everything I can to make sure that kids are safe, that children are safe. We have families who are literally here because their kids were almost murdered. Some of them have been a part of that tragedy. And you sit here, you talk about the things that we're not doing or we could do, even though you have every opportunity to bring proposals right now to do something about it. And we would like to see that.
Senator Lucero. After Senator Lucero, I told him I'd recognize him.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to reiterate, if we are going to engage in healthy conversations on the merits or demerits of the proposals, it is not healthy to be telling the members why or why not they're voting against something. Questioning the motives, such as what we just heard. You guys, referring to the Republicans, are not supporting something. Why? Because it's authored by a Democrat. You are questioning motives. That is, are you admitting you're questioning motives? You just shook your head yes. And if that's what you're doing, if you're questioning the motives, it's not productive, it's not healthy, it's a violation of the rules of decorum. You have no idea why we're voting for or against, aside from what we say. And I think every single one of us has spoken very loud and clear. The proposals before us are either against the Constitution, they're not going to solve the problem, they're going after law-abiding citizens, they are not bringing direct solutions to safeguard our children in schools, they're not working to bring our communities safer, they're not focused on these other elements that are contributing factors. That is what we have said, and that is the motivation why we're either for or against different proposals. So questioning the motives, again, from the onset of today's meeting, I thought it was a very productive dialogue. We need to be focused on the proposals and language before us, not why or why not. It's not healthy, it's not productive, it's not moving us forward. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Just for what it's worth, the Senate rule against questioning motives only applies to floor debate. This doesn't apply to standing committees, and this is not even an official committee of any sort. But for what it's worth, just to set that record straight. Senator Durham, you wanted to respond?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. My comments were reflecting my own district and what they would like to see in my district and how things that happen across the state affect my district. And, Senator Mohammed, like I said, we serve on every committee. We get along great. I have a lot of respect for her, and I hope she has a lot of respect for me. And we just have different districts. But I have to help the people in my district. That's what I was elected to do. and I try to keep a pretty open mind. A lot of the time we spend up here is on things that happen outside of my district. Not that they don't affect it, but the primary reaction, because we're a reactive body, I hate to say, is more metro-based than outstate-based. Good or bad, and I know that's where more people live. But I've been here my 9th year, and you know, I've carried a lot of bills for public safety in schools. You know, I've tried to work on solutions. I'm a more solution-based. You know, what is the end goal? And to me, I see this committee as how do we protect our families? How do we protect those kids? So that's why when I talk of priorities, that's the vision I see on to use those limited resources. Because we're facing a deficit. We have a structural deficit. So that's why I said what I did. I apologize, Chair Latz. I did not mean to stir the pot. I was just pointing out my district. Thank you.
Well,
Senator Mohammed.
Thank you, Chair Latz. I know we're moving on. I appreciate you, Senator Durham. I think that you and I do get along, and that's been pretty clear in committees. I was not trying to assert any motives, but I do think that we have fundamental disagreements, and in this body and in this committee, at least work group, let's do what we can to get some consensus.
Okay, I don't sense any consensus on funding the Violence Prevention Project Research Center. Let's move on to the Civil Commitment Coordinator Bill language. This was my bill. I'm just going to take a temperature real quick here. Is there anyone here support funding a Civil Commitment Coordinator position in the Attorney General's office with the mandates and scope of work that was included in the Monday discussion to look at the relation with the criminal justice system and to set up a long-term advisory committee of experts on how we can do better about civil commitment? Is there any support for this? Okay, I'm seeing yeses on to the left of me. Senator Drahan.
Thank you. And that was part of the mental health bill that we passed just a couple of years ago. And so the program's just starting to take off. And when we passed that, we knew there would be more work to be done on it. But I don't know if this is a higher priority. Once again, looking at priorities on what to do. So I do think there is more work to do for civil commitment. I just don't know if this is the right place at this point in time.
Senator Howe.
Well, I just got some, you know, in the drafting of the bill, was NAMI or anybody else consulted when you drafted the bill? I know we had a hearing on it. I'm just wondering, I just can't remember.
NAMI was part of the original large group conversations at which the entire concept was discussed. With regard to the particular draft bill, they were not in a position at that time to support its advancement. Any other positions anyone wishes to express with regard to that bill? Not seeing anything. All right. Ghost guns. The proposal is to ban ghost guns, which is guns that do not have any serial number that can be used to identify the gun. That includes guns that are purchased through mail order, parts that are assembled or built on a 3D printer. And I will say, even since the proposal, I have been advised that the only part of the firearm that cannot be built on a 3D printer is the barrel. And so there's an opportunity even there. But the ghost gun law was a part of Minnesota law. It was recently invalidated by the Minnesota Supreme Court on statutory grounds interacting with federal law. So the question would be supporting reenacting the ghost gun ban with language that would fix the drafting problems. Okay, I'm seeing to the left of me a bunch of heads nodding yes. To the right of me, do I see any feedback on this? Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I am not on the Judiciary Committee, as you know, and I don't have a great deal of experience with this particular issue. Can you, when you say fix the gun, the ghost gun issue, can you help clarify, is it currently legal under law to create one's own gun or firearm? Can one either, whether it be 3D print or whether it be through parts, is the process of assembling or manufacturing for oneself, by oneself, their own firearm, is that currently legal?
You know, I'm not entirely sure if that process of manufacturing one's own firearm is legal, but the law until the Minnesota Supreme Court decision was any firearm that you had was required to have a serial number so it could be traced. So, I mean, there may have to be some mechanism for assigning serial numbers at some point through the BCA, but that's the best I can answer you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And then, so just to refresh, and so this proposal is not touching the issue of legality or illegality of creating one's firearm. This is dealing with creating a database at the government level to assign unique serial numbers of some identifier to be able to put on them, whether it's a newly constructed firearm or whether it's a firearm from 100 years ago that predates. Is that what this concept is getting at?
Senator Lucero, the concept is to make sure that every firearm has a serial number. If there is a mechanism in place for serial numbers to be assigned through a government process for self-manufactured or assembled firearms, then that would be a way to comply with the law. If there is no such process in place, no government process for issuing serial numbers or database, as you talked about, then the only way to obtain a firearm with a serial number would be to purchase it through a lawful wholesaler, I suppose, an FFL. That would comply with law requiring serial numbers. But having unidentifiable, untraceable firearms, which are showing up more and more frequently at crime scenes, is a public safety problem. This is an attempt to reinstate the ban that was invalidated.
And thank you, Mr. Chair. One more question of clarity then. So firearms not newly constructed, but in the scenario of something that's 100 years old or predates, is that falling in scope of what you're getting at here for the requirement for a serial number to exist?
Honestly, I don't know if there's an exception in here for antique firearms or anything like that, but if that were a concern, I'd be happy to try to address that.
Okay, so thank you, Mr. Chair. At this point, there's enough questions that I have, so I'm not going to support it at this time, but those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Any other feedback from members of the GOP? Senator Matthews.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I briefly mentioned this Monday, but I watched how this got used against a constituent pretty substantially for a couple of years that completely upended everything. And that's why I'm wary about this until I give it a lot more thought with how this has all been set up. So, thank you.
Any other feedback? Not seeing any. We'll move on to the firearm safety training requirement in Senate File 511. Whose bill was this or presented it? Senator Bolden. Can you give us 30 seconds, please, on the concept?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very concisely, this is a common sense bill that just would requiring individuals who are purchasing or taking ownership of a firearm, a deadly weapon, they would have to provide evidence of training in safe use of that firearm. And there are some, it details, what that must include, that they have, instruction in the fundamentals, shooting qualification exercise, and legal aspects. But essentially, it's just making sure that someone who owns a deadly weapon has training in how to safely use that deadly weapon.
Is there any feedback on this proposal from members of the working group? I'm looking to my left. Any sense of support or opposition from the left side of the table? Support, okay. Any sense of support or opposition from the right side of the table?
You know, Mr.
My
Chair.
right, Senator Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I guess to my right physically and perhaps ideologically. Go ahead.
I think most people know that. But it does depend on your perspective, because you're sitting out there, I'm to your left.
That's correct. We're going to advertise that now. Senator Howe is to Senator Latz's left.
It all depends on your perspective in life. You know, I would like to go back to some of the comments that one of our testifiers said on Monday, the gentleman from 32B. You know, I think this is going to cause a huge delay possibly for somebody that maybe have a restraining order, possibly needs that firearm quicker, and now it's going to delay the availability to purchase. So that's where I really have an issue with it. I'm all for the training requirement, but the concern is, does that firearm training certificate that I got when I was 12 years old qualify, or doesn't it? And so if it doesn't, you know, I think there's some concern there, because most of us wouldn't comply with that. So there's my concerns with that.
I think the recency of a certificate or training could be something that can be worked on to address that concern. Senator Bolden, would you agree? As to the concept, any other feedback? Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question on clarity. Does the proposal, is the training requirement to purchase, or is the training requirement to own? And if it's to own, what happens in the scenario of people right now that own firearms?
Senator Bolden.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm going to pull us back. I think, you know, the question is about the concept, so I'm going to pull us back to the concept of having training for owning a weapon. The language as it stands, I believe, is both, is around purchasing, but open to conversation about that.
Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And then another question I would have, it doesn't need to be answered, but I can't support the concept as it's just too vague. But if a person is, they have a disability of some kind. It could be a mental disability, but it could be a physical disability. Maybe they've lost an arm, or, you know, who knows what that might be, maybe missing fingers. I'm concerned about, because this is the ability to own a firearm is a constitutional right. And to put some kind of a litmus test in there for people that may have different abilities is a cause for concern, especially when it comes to training that might be created that is general training for a certain type of person, but doesn't take into account persons that might have a disability of some kind, of physical disability. Again, there's a lot of questions around this, even aside from the constitutional requirement. So with that, again, I just can't support it. Thank you.
Let the record reflect on providing Senator Lucero with a copy of Senate File 511, so there's no longer any vagueness defense. Senator Heinzman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just a question. If a woman fears for her safety in a domestic violence situation or stalking or harassment, will she have to wait 30 days to purchase a firearm?
Senator Bolden.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, open to, and I should say this is a Senator Mann bill, so I'm speaking on her behalf a little bit, but I feel confident in saying that very open to conversations about the specific language, with the bottom line being, you know, a woman in a domestic violence situation who wants to own a gun. Anyone who owns a deadly weapon should have training on how to safely use that deadly weapon. That's really the bottom line of the purpose of this policy, and so I would just go back to that and open to having conversations on the specifics of if there are concerns about specific language.
Senator Heinzman.
Thank you. So she would have to wait and possibly face threat of death. Thank you for your answer.
Just for the record, I think the evidence shows that, and this would obviously not apply in every case, but a firearm owned by a woman for self-defense, the evidence is it is more likely to end up being used against her by the attacker rather than used to successfully defend herself, and that's the data. So maybe that points the need for, even greater need for training on how to safely use the firearm and to prevent it from being taken by an attacker and used against her. Senator Drahan.
Thank you. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. Overall, I'm of course for firearm safety training. Most of the youth in my area are trained. Most of the old timers in my district remember the time where they did it in school. And sometimes even in the buildings, which I know is unheard of today. So I'm all for the training, but like all of these bills, the devil's in the details. And my biggest problem is the delay that I perceive that's in here. I don't want it to prohibit someone to be able to purchase a firearm. And a lot of times people like to purchase a gun and then go train on that gun. To me, that's the proper way of doing it. So this would make it hard. So that's my 2 cents.
Senator Dre, I'm just trying to look through the bill here, but I don't, maybe someone else can point this out to me, but I don't see a mandatory delay. All I see is a training requirement. Someone could go over to Bill's gun shop right now and Crystal probably get trained in an hour or 2 hours in a class and meet the requirement and then go buy a gun from Bill's right there. Unless I'm just scanning the bill, I might have missed it. Someone else can point it out to me if I did.
And I think that could be the case if you lived in the metro. And, if you're way up north, there might not be someone around to offer the training, et cetera. So I think there could be a delay, transportation issues, et cetera, so.
I'm gonna guess if you buy a gun from a federally licensed firearms dealer, you can probably get training. My guess is they offer classes and training as well. Be another revenue source, but not my usual place of purchasing anything. Any other thoughts on the Senator Bolden?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will just add our background check process typically requires a 30-day period for that to happen. There are ways around that in certain circumstances, like in the ones we are talking about, where law enforcement can intervene and it can happen quicker than that. I think that is language that potentially we could replicate. I think there are ways around that. And again, happy to continue to work on that if that is a specific concern. But again, want to be sure that people who are owning a deadly weapon have training and can safely do that.
Any other discussion or opinions members want to express on this proposal? Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think the delay that's being spoken of here, so when it comes to a permit to carry course, we don't have concealed carry in Minnesota, we have permit to carry. The permit to carry course is a 6-hour training course. And those are sometimes scheduled weeks out in advance. And so I think the delay that's being referred to is an inherent delay of if somebody needs to act in a situation where they believe their life is in danger, that they need to act immediately. And if they're a law-abiding citizen, to put a burden on them to schedule weeks out potentially, and if they're in rural Minnesota, it's another layer of complexity. It might be many more weeks on top of that to find a class to then pay for that and go through that delay. So the question, Mr. Chair, and maybe Senator Bolden, would you be in favor of maybe a modified proposal that to have a generalized training, maybe a firearms training in high school that might qualify for this? So then that way the general public is familiar, and those who are 18 years old or 17, 18 would be more familiar with firearms and have the healthy respect and knowledge of how to properly treat firearms with the respect they deserve.
Senator Bolden.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as we talked about before, I think we could talk about the time frame or the recency of the training. I think the bottom line here is we want to be sure that people who are owning a deadly weapon can do that safely and have that knowledge. And so whether it is a class that somebody took when they were 17 or 18, or whether they took it in the last year, we can talk about that time frame, but want to get to a place where there is an expectation and a requirement for people who have that deadly weapon, have training to use it safely.
I'm going to take a poll of the committee. Senator Howell, briefly.
I was just wondering if I sell one of my firearms to someone, he provides me documentation that he took the training, how long do I have to keep that documentation? And yeah, I guess that's my question, and how do I verify that the documentation is correct? And what's the penalty if I don't?
Well, such a sale would certainly be subject to the universal background check requirements for lawful transfers of firearms, and there are record-keeping requirements. And you can only sell it to someone if they had already obtained a permit to purchase a firearm. Beyond that, sounds like some details that might need to be addressed, but the idea is the concept here of requiring firearm safety training before a transfer, a sale of a firearm to a person is permitted. Is there anyone on the GOP side that can say that they are in support of the concept? I'm not seeing anyone at this point, so we're going to move on. All right. Office of Gun Violence Prevention, now in Senate File 513, which is Senator Mann and Gustafson and Bolden. Bill, who presented that? Senator Bolden. 30 seconds on the concept, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Briefly, this bill would establish an Office of Gun Violence Prevention under the Department of Health. The office director would be appointed by the Commissioner of Health to do a number of things: coordinate and promote effective efforts to reduce gun violence and related trauma, coordinate and promote and conduct research. They would give us, at the legislature, information and data, create public health campaigns, support and provide resources for victims of gun violence. We know that gun violence is a public health crisis, and so this would direct resources to be able to respond to that.
What is the sense of the working group members as to whether or not this is a concept that ought to be recommended? Senator Clark.
Thank you, Chair Latz. For me, this sort of answers a lot of the questions that we've been bringing up to go, all right, how do we consider this piece of minutia? And the piece of minutia is not minutia. It's important to get at the base of what we're all trying to do, save folks' lives. And so I think this is a spot where we, Senator Draheim has talked about how do we figure out priorities to get to where we really need to invest in dollars. This is a tool that will help us figure out where we really need to invest dollars to be able to help inform us along the way. So there's the annual report that would, in this suggestion, I would want to work more with it to be like, all right, annual report and who is responsible. So these are, and I like the idea with the Commissioner also. For me, this is because it brings in all, so this is a longer-winded way of saying I like it, and this is one of the bigger pieces that I like in our set of lists, proposals.
From the members to my left, is there a sense of support for this? I'm seeing consensus, yes. How about to my right? Any feedback on this one? An Office of Violence Prevention? Senator Draheim.
Thank you. Once again, it's about priorities, and to me is the last thing we're in need of more red tape and more government. What we need to do is enforce the laws that we have and put more law enforcement on the streets. That's my opinion.
Any other feedback from the GOP members? Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just sharing the sentiment. I think that in order to create safer schools and safer communities, we need to direct hardening of schools, SROs, in the schools, putting funding towards law enforcement professionals, especially when we know that there are some agencies that are down hundreds of officers. That has, that emboldens these other hardened criminals who seek to do others harm. And I don't have a lot of confidence in the Department of Health, given the amount of the headlines we've seen in the last couple of years of whether it be fraud or whether it be any number of things that's happened. I don't have the confidence in government staff under this agency or members, other agencies of the executive branch to fulfill the offices of keeping people safe and healthy. So again, the proposal that's before us is something I simply can't support.
Any other feedback? Not seeing any. We'll move on to the proposal to remove the preemption of local government from passing their own stricter gun-related legislation than in state law. Whose bill was this? Senator Pappas's. She presented. I think it's pretty evident on its face what it does. The characterization from the revisor's office, authorizing local governmental units to prohibit or restrict the possession of dangerous weapons, ammunition, or explosives in local government-owned or leased buildings and land. Senator Clark.
I think the reminder that we received on this was, in the city of Minneapolis, we are not able to ban the items that you said from our city hall because it is a wholly owned city hall. It does not have any judicial branch in it. If there was judicial branch, then the city of Minneapolis could. So St. Paul, city of St. Paul City Hall can prohibit because they have judicial activities in there, but the city of Minneapolis does not. So this would give cities like Minneapolis and other small towns that are city hall only the ability to make their own choice.
So quite literally, Senator Clark, if they couldn't do security screening at City Hall in Minneapolis, or if they did, they could take away a knife, but if someone had a gun, they'd have to be let in.
Chair Latz, that's my understanding.
What's the sense of members to my left in support of the bill? Of the members to my right? Any feedback? Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Mr. Just a question of clarity, and whoever might be able to answer it, that's not my understanding of the local preemption. My understanding is we have statewide uniform regulatory requirements or prohibitions in multiple areas. One of them is like the seatbelt law, right? You don't have to, as you're driving down the freeway, you're not as you change local government jurisdiction, you're not changing, well, you have to wear your seatbelt, you don't have to wear your seatbelt. Same thing with these firearm laws. As you're driving down the highway, if you're a permit to carry holder, you're not changing, you have a uniform understanding. And so, as was described, it's not just City Hall. My understanding is the proposal is it would allow local units of government to regulate firearms comprehensively. And that is just something that is the antithesis of what's going to be good policy for the state of Minnesota. So this is absolutely not something that I would support. Thank you.
Let the record reflect I am providing Senator Lucero with Senate File 2320, which I just read the synopsis of. The elected governing body of a local governmental unit may prohibit or restrict a person from possessing a dangerous weapon, ammunition, or explosives within a building or on land owned or leased by the local governmental unit, except as provided under subdivision 1G. And there are a number of exceptions for like police officers and so on. It is not a general firearm regulation provision. I'm sorry, Senator Drahan.
Thank you, Senator Latz. Roads, is that, driving down a road through the town that's owned by the city.
Senator Draheim, I don't know the answer to that statutory interpretation question. Something that could be worked on in the concept so that everyone who's driving through a city wouldn't have to stop at the border or find a bypass. And yeah, something to work on. Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate that clarity, but it doesn't reduce the concern that I have. Because when I go to Minneapolis, or I go to St. Paul, or I go to these other cities, I don't know, there could be government land, there could be government buildings that I might be unaware of, that I might be entering. Some of them are contract buildings, like if it's a privately held building, but it's being contracted by a government entity, does that qualify? I mean, there's a number of questions here that would potentially make law-abiding firearm owners unknowingly criminals by their mere passing from one jurisdiction to the next, and that's something why we have the preemption in place and why I would seek to retain that preemption, to have that uniformity. Thank you.
Senator Howe.
Thank you, Senator Latz. So what we're saying is if I go to pay my water bill, I'd have to take my firearm off, put it in my car, which I've just been instructed by the sheriff that that's not a thing to do because they get stolen there. How do I, so that's my issue is I can't do daily work and business if that is the case. And myself, I carry every day. I'm in City Hall every day. Not in Minneapolis, but in outstate greater Minnesota. So, I just, do we pick and choose who we enforce that to, or is that on everyone? And I guess that's my concern. How do I know what city enforces what when I go to do just regular business? Do I got to do research every time and look it up on Google to figure out if I'm going to get in trouble when I walk in?
Senator Howe, I think part of this is a local control question. Should the state be mandating these controls, or shall we allow our local governments to determine what is in the best safe interests of their own more specific community in terms of those kinds of questions? Ordinarily, I would think you might find it more beneficial to give local authority rather than state authority to these kind of public safety questions, Senator Howe. And I'm also understanding that usually it's your wife who pays the utility bills, not you. I'm not being sexist here. He made a comment in committee once about exactly that point, so.
She is the financial director of the family. I make it, she figures out where it goes. But my concern is there we got a patchwork of different laws all over the state on where, and it gets important because I can commit a crime with not even knowing that I'm going to do it. And I think that's the important thing, that this is one of those things that in a lot of things I am in favor of local control, but in this case, having a patchwork of different regulations where people can unknowingly get themselves in trouble, I think is not a proper path to go through.
All right, any other final thoughts on Senator Draheim?
Thank you. I'll try to be brief. A lot of us go to the county seat to look up information or work on permits, other various items. So we might not live in that community, but we have to go into that community. And numerous times I've had to drive to St. Paul to see a state office to find out information or defend myself or one of my companies over something that one of the state agencies had questions about. And so I think there are cases, a lot of cases, that you go into a community you normally don't live, and if you are traveling, and I know there are industries where they go into multiple county seats, maybe on the same day. So I do think it isn't as cut and dry, as clean as what's being proposed. And I know that it was just recently reported that the response time in Minneapolis has gone up almost 40% in the last 5 years. And I know they're trying to hire more people. I applaud them for trying to hire more policemen. But that 8 minutes, 8.29 minutes is a long time. You know, and I think we're punishing the honest people again with this bill. The criminals aren't going to care where the line is separating Minneapolis or Mankato or Montgomery or whatever community it is. The bad people are going to do bad things, and we should go after the bad people instead of the honest people. And I think this is just another example of punishing the law-abiding citizens. So I would not support it.
All right, I don't sense any support from the right side of the table here. Assault weapons and large capacity magazines ban. What's the sense of the working group on this one? I'll look first to my left, as I have all morning. I see heads nodding in support of this proposal, and to my immediate right as well, the chief author of that proposal. Anyone else wish to express a position on this one? Any members of the GOP wish to weigh in on whether you support an assault weapons and large capacity magazine ban? Senator Lucero.
I will just add, Mr. Chair, this is another example, both of this one and the next one are examples that will not make our community safer, will not protect our children, and that's where we need to put the focus. And the evil people that purpose themselves to commit violence will break dozens upon dozens of laws, as was done in every single one of these horrific, tragic shootings. Dozens of laws are broken. If you add on a few more laws, it's not going to change these evil people who seek to skirt laws, to flagrantly disregard laws. And an assault on the Constitution and against law-abiding firearm owners is not the correct direction. So again, those are my comments for this and the next proposal. Thank you.
Senator Gustafson first, then we'll just go down the road.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know that this is the big bill, right? This is the one that is probably would take the most amount of work to get to a consensus to. I think we can get there. I think this is just our first glance at what could be in the bill, what we could work on together. I think all of you know me well enough to know that I would be happy to talk with you. Senator Mohammed would be happy to talk with you about what it would take for you to get to an agreement, to just work on the concept of what this could look like. And there are lots of conversations that we could have about what gets included, what doesn't get included. I just want to go back to something Hope's mom said on the first day, that you're right, Senator Lucero, there's no bill that is going to prevent every shooting from taking place in the future. That's going to take a lot of different things. And we can do mental health and we can do school security, but we're not going to do those two without also addressing guns. And I think what Hope's mom said to me that really struck me was that no policy is going to prevent every shooting from happening. But the next one, what kind of gun do you want the shooter to use? We have an option here of limiting the types of weapons that are accessible in Minnesota. And I think that's what we can agree on, is keeping some of these weapons out of the hands of the general public, some of the weapons. And we can talk about what that looks like, and we can make decisions about what should be included or not included. I think we really could come to a consensus on this. I would love to sit down with you all and work with things that you can do, that you can't do, and talk about those things. I hope we can get to a place where we can at least agree on a concept of the bill and what could go into it. I hope that we can do that.
Senator Westland.
Just very briefly, this is the big bill. This is the thing that we talked about and spent so much time talking about Monday, and this is an issue that has come up over and over and over again. And I think that polling in the state of Minnesota suggests that this is something that has broad support of the people that we represent. If we talk about everything but this, I think we will not have done the work that needs to be done. I've heard a lot of talk about hardening schools, and the fact is that that has actually not been shown to be especially effective. It has a negative impact on our kids. Our kids need to go to schools that are safe, but they should not be walking into a building that looks like a prison or a fortress. They should be going into an environment where they can learn. It is our responsibility to reduce the risk of shootings, and one of the ways we do that is to remove the availability of these particular weapons. We had doctors testify about the impact of these high-velocity weapons on small bodies. I will simply repeat, we are in a moral moment, and I have moral clarity about what we need to do, and I pray to God that we can get this over the finish line.
Senator Bolden.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I hope we can get to a place where we can pass this. We absolutely should. The majority of Minnesotans want us to do this. I'm also thinking back to the testimony that we heard on Monday, both of the parents who came to us, who talked about the harm and the damage that and trauma that their children are enduring because of this. But also, I think about my colleagues as healthcare professionals and the doctors who talked about the specific damage that these weapons cause to little bodies, and they are designed for that purpose. These are weapons that are designed to kill people, to kill many people. They are weapons of war, and they are turning our classrooms, our grocery stores, nightclubs, movie theaters into war zones. And it doesn't have to be that way. And I am not going to ask this question to any of my colleagues here, but I would like all of us to think about, if God forbid it was our child in that situation, and their tiny body was torn apart from the inside, from a bullet, from an AR-15, would we feel the same? Would we not say, of course, these weapons of war should not be available to people in our communities? And I have to think we would say that. And all kids are our kids. This shouldn't be happening. We have an opportunity to limit that, to be sure that these weapons of war are not in the hands of people in our communities. And so I hope that we can get to that place. I am committed to that. I want to, again, thank everybody who is pushing us to do that. Keep pushing us until we get it done.
Senator Mohammed.
Thank you, Chair Latz. First of all, I just want to take a moment to thank the families and all the folks who came on Monday to speak to what happened and their truth, and to let us know what they need from us in this moment. And I think that call is clear, not just from the families that have been impacted by this, but from Minnesotans. 60% of Americans support a ban on assault weapons. And the truth is, in this body, you will hear enough is enough. These kids were praying. What more can we do? And the honest truth is, this body will not act unless the public does. It is up to the public to demand what they want from their legislators and to let them know where you are. Because they will use political talking points to tell you why they don't want to infringe on your fundamental rights. And then they're gonna wanna infringe on your fundamental rights when it comes to a woman's abortion. They don't honestly care about the truth. They don't care about your families. They don't care about your kids. They care about power, gaining it, keeping it. That's the honest truth. What I care about is the families of Harbor and Fletcher, the families at Annunciation, the families who showed up Monday, the families who are here again today, who are looking at us because they understand that we have the opportunity and the power to do something about it. The kids who survived will never be the same. And if you know anybody who survived gun violence like I have, you know that their lives will never be the same. I don't go for walks at night, and I never talk about this, because of a gun shooting that happened in 2020 to me at night, because I picture what happens every single time I go out when the sun goes down. Those kids will never be the same. Those teachers will never be the same. And so while you make excuses about what's politically right, what the role of the government is, what the role of families and communities are, ask yourself, what will you tell the mother who goes home to her child who has nightmares about what happened? What will you tell about the mother who doesn't have a child coming home and will never see her kid? We can agree on some things. We can disagree on some things. This is a simple and effective policy that works. It's worked in the 10 years when we had it as a federal law. You have the power to do something, and it's up to you, and it's up to the public to demand it.
Senator Drahan.
Thank you. Nice discussion. I appreciate it. This isn't a new proposal. It has been before. The body that it's been introduced before to ban assault weapons or assault rifles, however you define that. Like I mentioned before, the devil's in the details on anything. And there are problems with the bill, in my opinion, on constitutionality and how it's drafted, the definitions, et cetera. But in my district, which we're here to represent our districts, and there couldn't be two more opposite districts than Senator Mohammed and myself, majority of the emails I've gotten, it's like 100 to 1, if not 200 to 1, not to do this in my district and where I represent. I am a border district. I border Iowa. Even though I start in Scott County, I end up down by Iowa. And I don't think this bill is going to do what people hoped it would, or I think you hope it would do. And I think we all want to protect our children. I would do anything for my children or my neighbor's children. I just don't think this bill is going to do what you think it's going to do. And Senator Westland, you mentioned the schools not looking like a prison. And I agree. We don't want our schools to look like prisons. We want them to be inviting. It should be a happy place. Like our churches should be a happy place, a safe place. When we toured the school in Lakeville, you could not tell that they put in a bunch of improvements. And that was the goal when they did the projects throughout the whole district. And kudos to that school district. To me, that should be our priority, is to use the tools and the technology that's out there to protect our kids when they're at school. And like I said before, I've done a lot of bills on school safety over the 9 years I've been here. And I think all of us have that perception that when that kid gets on that school bus, our kids are going to be safe. When we drop off those kids at the front door, those kids are going to be safe. I feel Lakeville is headed down the right path. Is it perfect? No, nothing ever will be. But they did a great job of some common sense solutions that the kids don't even know are there. And if you have not toured that, I think that is something we should tour. You know, I would be happy to go with anybody. It's only an hour from my house. But there's technology that will protect our kids. That's what we should be focusing on. This ban here in Minnesota they can go across the border and get it anywhere, or they can call up someone that's selling something illicit and buy guns right now. That's where a lot of guns are purchased right now, illegally, like the ghost guns. So I applaud you bringing up the idea. I have no problem with it. I just couldn't support it. My district wouldn't support it. But I'm glad we had the opportunity to talk about it.
Senator Matthews.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members, Monday was a really rough day for a lot of us in this room. This summer has been this year has been a really rough year for a lot of us. First off, the accusations about what our motives are, we all know those aren't true. We all know here that we are looking at how do we keep and protect our kids safe. We know people work to get around laws. In 2023, when some of the gun control bills were passed, and I've gone back and I've watched some of the videos, quotes were made specifically saying, this will prevent violence from happening before it starts and it will save lives. And yet we know how someone can get around it. Someone did get around it, and this tragic situation occurred in our communities. We know how someone could get around this proposal. And I keep thinking back to, I want the now what question answered. If someone's getting around it and intending to do that type of grotesque evil, now what? What are we going to do that stops it in its tracks? I think what we saw on Saturday, that I was there as well, gave us a picture of how someone's going in and intending to do evil and quickly gets frustrated and not able to accomplish what they're intending to do, at least to the extent that they were trying. It was a very, very fascinating tour. I see we're making some of the same claims on this bill that were said a couple years ago. Let's stop this from ever happening again. Let's make sure this gun's not used in the future. I don't think those are promises that we can accurately and truthfully make. I quickly did some research as this was being discussed. It appears that every or almost every state that has already put this ban in place has still suffered violent acts from these types of firearms. So I don't think we can honestly promise Minnesotans that we'll pass this law and we'll make sure this never happens again, because unfortunately people that are trying to get around and do evil to our kids have still found ways to do that. But I have looked at what can we do, what will answer the now what question to stop it in its tracks. And that's what I'm hoping there's enough time for me to mention a proposal at the end. That's what we've tried to bring from our side to this as we keep talking about officers and security and mental health. It's things that are dealing with the now what question after someone has already decided they're going to go around every law. And it is for that shared purpose to make sure that we keep our kids as safe as we can. Because I have little ones too, and I've looked at them. I have been hugging my kids tighter this summer multiple times. From wondering whether I was directly targeted to being in the shoes of parents that are out here. It's horrific what some of you have had to go through. And we might disagree on what the answer of how we answer now what, but I think we can all recognize that is what we're trying to get here with this bill. And so if time allows, I will share that idea at the end, but that's why we've looked at this proposal the way that we have, and why we've said I think we have some other suggestions for what we can actually do in that now what moment. Thank you.
Senator Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I will tell you that thank you for not calling on me right away after Senator Mohammed, because what she said really, really upset me, that I don't care about kids, that I just care about power. As one of those that has gone through a school shooting with his kids in the school, that can't be further from the truth. My son was deeply affected by that. I mean, that one of those individuals was a firefighter's son. Another one of those individuals that got killed that day was a high school classmate of mine's son. So I was deeply affected by that school shooting. So to sit here and say that I don't care about kids, so I'm calmed down from just a few minutes ago, even though it doesn't seem like it. And I will say that I have probably had more lead fly by my head than anybody else here, because I have been in war. And it deeply affects you. And I'm not the same guy I was before. And that's why veterans issues are a huge issue for me. But I will say that the weapon I carried in war was not the weapon that I got in my gun safe at home. They're different. And if you don't understand that, you should go take a class on it or go study it, because they're not the same. They look the same. They may have a lot of the same operating features, but they are not the same. And so I don't believe your bill, Senator Mohammed, will make the changes that you hope so, because those of us that are law-abiding don't do these things. And the people that are going to do these types of things to children and to the innocent people are going to get those weapons, regardless if they're legal here or not. You go to Chicago, where Chicago points the fingers at Indiana. Chicago's got some of the toughest gun laws in the nation, but they got some of the highest shooting rates in the nation. And they point their finger and say, well, they go to Indiana to get the guns. Well, guess what? If the people that want to do evil here can't get their guns here, they're close enough to Wisconsin, they're close enough to Iowa, they're close enough to the Dakotas. What I would like to concentrate on stuff that we can do and will make a difference tomorrow. To me, this bill will be caught up in the legislation. That legislation, I mean, will be caught up in courts. It'll probably end up at the Supreme Court. I think we should do stuff like Lakeville did. That tour, I went there as a skeptic. I'm not a skeptic any longer. They did a fantastic job, in my opinion, and it's something that we, as far as I'm concerned, we should install in every school, public and private, in this state. And then I think we need to do what we haven't done since we closed our state hospitals, is we need to build out our mental health system and fund mental health the way it was supposed to be done when we closed those state hospitals. And we have neglected that. This bill, you had the trifecta. You could have passed this bill last year. The year before that, you could have passed this bill, but you didn't. And now you blame us. I think that is just a false narrative. So let's come together and do the things that will actually make a difference. And I'll make a difference immediately. Thank you.
Senator Heinzman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I have another question for you. Being the newest member, you're welcome, Senator Clark. Do you believe that your caucus is 34 strong on this issue? And if yes, why would you not have passed it during the trifecta? And if no, why would those members object?
Well, right now, we only have 33 members in the caucus, actually 32 until the special election for the vacancy is filled. Or I'm sorry, we have 33 until there's a special election. We'll see how that goes. I think it's fair to say if this needs to be a bipartisan solution. And that's what we're trying to accomplish.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Heitzman.
So I think from that answer, you are not strong in your caucus as a collective group. And so the answer, or the question, the second part of it, is if you're not, what are the objections of the members in your caucus that would be opposed to it?
I don't think it's a fair characterization that we're not strong. That's a pretty broad term. I think it is fair to say in 2023 and 2024, there was not 34 committed to voting in favor of such a bill. Either way, I think we need a bipartisan solution. I will let the opponents speak for themselves as to why they don't support it. I'm not going to characterize their positions for them. Senator Mohammed, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I'll just add, my comment to this earlier were not just for a particular side of the aisle, for the record. It was for everyone, because you have the opportunity to do something about it. I also reject the notion that this policy doesn't impact gun violence, because it does. And the statistics and the numbers show that when this ban was in place, that mass shootings went down. And so I think when you look at states that have passed it, the numbers have actually gone down. I will also say this, thank you for your service, Senator Howe, because I understand what it feels like to be in the midst of a war as a child who is a survivor of war and a gun violence victim. And so no one understands this issue probably more than me and yourself, and we have the opportunity to do something about it. And the issue, the problem, is the guns, so let's address it.
I'm not sensing a consensus here. I did indicate I would give an opportunity for GOP proposals. It's now almost 12:20, 20 minutes past the planned adjournment time for this working group, and I had one member indicate that he now wishes to make a proposal. Senator Matthews, if you'd like to make your proposal, and we'll see if we can take a few minutes anyway to consider it.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have language in front of me, but I don't think language is needed. It's going to be pretty simple, and I think it's just a matter of whether we can pay for it in the state. But given what has gone on, I think that the legislature should strongly consider having the funding available for any public school or private school that wants one to be able to get an SRO quickly in the school. And I heard loud and clear on Monday that some people don't have as much comfort with that as maybe I do or some others do. But I think there are some schools in light of what has happened that I think would definitely take that opportunity if it was available to them. And as I've sat here and thought through, like, what's the best way that we can try to prevent this in the future? We heard about, like, it was 4 minutes response time a couple of weeks ago, and props to every one of our law enforcement that ran right into the face of danger. We all know 4 minutes is still a long time for someone that's inflicting evil on our kids to keep doing damage. And so I've kept trying to think through in my mind, what's the thing that we could do that could be the most immediate help? And this is what I keep coming back to. This is something that if there was one in the local school tomorrow, our kids would be better off tomorrow than they were yesterday. And so I'm not going to go as far as to say right now as to say that we should pass this as a mandate. But I think the legislature needs to consider having a pot of money available and make it large enough that anyone that wants one, anyone that sees the needs of their families and their kids and thinks that it would be valuable to have that available to them and specifically delineate it for them, because a lot of school districts are already struggling financially and they're trying to find ways to make ends meet, and to have the state provide this and not have that pressing on their concerns. That's what I would put out for not just this working group, but for our whole legislature moving forward. And I hope I could get bipartisan consensus on that.
Thank you for your proposal, Senator Matthews. I actually have a question. I don't know if we have staff available or someone on the committee knows the answer. My understanding, part of the current funding structure for K-12 education includes public safety money available. I don't know for sure, and I don't know if it's only infrastructure versus personnel. So there might already be funding available in existing pots. Does anyone happen to know the answer to that question? Not seeing any. We don't have our education
Chair,
staff here.
I know they can levy for, I think it was like $38 or $39 per pupil, but I don't know if that covers the labor portion. But I know they can levy for that.
For infrastructure? For school safety generally? All right, so, and then my other question, Senator Matthews, would you propose that we have enough funding available for every school district to pay for their SROs? I'm not sure how you would decide which school districts get it and which ones don't otherwise. Senator Matthews?
Mr. Chair, I know that my side's not considered the big spending party, but for public and even private schools, I think the time and place that we're living in society, I think we have to have that conversation. I think we have to have it where we consider what does it take to pay for one for every school. And maybe it looks differently in different ways, and maybe it can be simple as, you know, the gentleman that was leading our tour even talked about a squad car at the end of the street. He said in his many long years of law enforcement experience, he never heard of a bank being robbed that had a squad car in the parking lot. You know, sometimes just a visual like that will help. But I think we're at that point where we need to have that conversation for funding for every public and every private school in Minnesota and what that would take. I think we need to study that and figure out what that dollar amount looks like.
And Senator Matthews, you don't have any idea what that dollar amount would look like? I mean, one of the reasons I ask is that law enforcement funding in Minnesota has historically been a local level appropriation, even though we have appropriated, 2 years ago, we appropriated over $300 million to local communities for public safety uses. And some used it for SROs, some used it for infrastructure, some used it to replace outdated squad cars and or whatever they chose as their own community priorities.
Yeah.
Senator Matthews, no idea on $50 million or $500 million? Any idea?
Mr. Chair, we've asked our education researchers, and we don't think anybody has come up with that number yet to this point. And so it would be my intention to work on that and see what that looks like.
Senator Gustafson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator Matthews. And I agree with you. I think, like, for those school districts that want an SRO, because correct me if I'm wrong, are you mandating it, or you're saying funding available for all schools who want it? You know, that is something immediate we can do, and I do think that that makes a difference. As I stated before, I am very open to school security efforts, and we could always use more funding for mental health care. But I think, so I'm open to the concept. I don't know if that's how we're voting now, right? Like, are you open? Yes, I'm open to the concept. I support that, talking more about this. But I also want to make sure that we're pairing it with something on guns too. I don't want us to walk away from a gun violence prevention work group only talking about things we agree on that don't address gun violence. So yes to funding for SROs for school districts who want one, but also what about the gun violence too? Can we talk about both of those things?
Senator Westland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am also open to talking about everything, but I do want to, it is important for us to make sure that we are addressing measures that actually improve safety and security and not engaging in security theater. And I'm not saying that to dismiss the idea, but there is research, and I think we should look at research to see what's helpful on this. But there is research that suggests the presence of law enforcement officers has not had a deterrent effect. There is research that shows that the rate of deaths was almost 3 times greater in schools with an armed guard present. Again, I'm not opposed to having a conversation for those schools that feel that that's appropriate for them, but I also want to be clear that is not the be-all, end-all either. If I remember correctly, I believe Columbine, they had an officer there, and oftentimes actually they're the first person shot. So I agree with Senator Gustafson that I keep saying this over and over again, we have to take a holistic approach that really looks at everything. There's not one thing that is going to be the solution to this. There's not one thing. It is creating an integrated web of policies that focus on harm reduction. Because nobody is saying we are ever, ever, ever going to completely rid ourselves of gun violence. But there are things that we can do that will reduce the risk, that will reduce harm. And I'm willing to have this conversation as well. I think this is an expensive conversation. It's worthy of having it, but we also have to talk about the guns. Thank you.
Any other discussion on Senator Matthews' proposal? Sounds like there may be some bipartisan consensus to move forward with fleshing out some options on this concept. Are there any other GOP proposals for our discussion today? All right, members, this concludes the work of this working group. Before we adjourn, I want to thank the sergeants, troopers, Department of Public Safety staff for assistance this week in keeping all of us safe in the work that we are doing. It is my hope that the members of this working group and the colleagues of ours in the Senate that we serve with are willing to work together to try to move forward to find items that we can agree on, that we can maybe get outside of our own worldviews perhaps, and accept there may be some validity to some views outside of that maybe it's worth as part of a package and supporting in the interest of advancing the interests of saving our kids and other members of the public from gun violence. So this, I think, is part of an ongoing discussion and ongoing work. And I hope that we're all ready to do that work. Not seeing anything else coming before this working group. Thank you for your work. We are adjourned.